Good afternoon, everybody. It's Jeff Lyons from Builterra. I'm glad you are taking some time today. We're just wait a few more minutes for others to join, and I'm glad that you were able to log in today. Okay, I've successfully muted everybody, so if you have any questions, you can use the chat window and ask me a question and I can respond. Otherwise, I'll go through the demo, and today's webinar is called How to Create a Standardized Item Catalog for Bid Preparation and Cost Estimating. This webinar will be essentially looking under the hood of the Builterra system and kind of going through all the little nuances of standardizing your catalog and connecting it to a tender section template for the purposes of cost estimating. Like I said, if you have any questions, you can just text me through the chat window. And we'll just wait for... Okay, so let's go ahead and start the agenda. The very first thing we'll look at is the table relationships of Builterra. This is something that we had to develop to be able to handle any project type for any type of city or private subdivision or site plan. And the way we did it was to accommodate for all of those changes in how a project is bidded out. The standardized catalog, we'll take a look at that and how the fixed catalog items are set up. The flexible pay item table configuration, we'll review that. The how the template is configured for export to Excel and data entry, that'll be the next step. So we have a fair amount of content to go through probably in the first half hour. Then we'll target the second 20 minutes or so to building a historic bid and reviewing the cost estimating system. Finally, exporting to Excel. That's our target for today, is to create a historic tender for cost estimating and an active tender for export to a bidder. The awarding the bid is just the final step of today's session. So if we look at the gap analysis that we show during our sales presentations, today we're going to look at the first bit. A couple of weeks ago, we looked at the design CAD part of the product. Today, we're going to kind of dig into this part here. And then as each webcast go every couple of weeks, we'll look at various parts of the workflow. So if you can't join us live, then you can always look at pre-recorded meetings. Okay, so just a quick overview for those who haven't seen the site before. This is an example of our interface. It's a Microsoft Azure web cloud product. All your projects are stored online, as well as all your inspection data and photos. We have a full photo viewer and review system for those who don't actually create data but just want to view photos and look at inspection data and tender data. So there's a good view of some photos. So basically, we cover the entire contract administration process. Today we'll be just looking at the tendering configuration part of it. Okay. Again, if I notice some more people have just joined. If you have any questions, you can just text me through the chat window. And we have Jennifer, our marketing person, online, and she can also respond to questions if you have them. So this is what we're looking to do today, is get into the tender preparation part of the product and kind of review certain aspects of it in case you haven't already implemented it at your company. So When we get into the tender prep, this is the final data entry screen. So everything that it takes to set this up, we'll be looking at that in the next half hour. Okay, including some cost estimating details. Ultimately, we want to produce a spreadsheet with the schedule unit prices, so then the contractors can fill it all out, and you can start capturing all the unit prices from your potential bidders. Okay, so as far as relationship goes, I'm not expecting people to be, relational database experts. It's good to know that this was well thought out, several years ago when we first built the product. This kind of looks confusing, but essentially this is as hard as it gets regarding Builterra. In other words, if you can understand this concept, everything else is easy. This is where we had to do some deep thinking into how did we want to set it up so then we can record not just the item code and description for these items, but actually a parameter-based cost estimating system that can be for any type of project. So we specialize in infrastructure projects, but there's really nothing stopping you from implementing this for a Revit architectural job or a structural job, HVAC, electrical. This can be for anything that has items attached to it. The standard item catalog is really where all of the individual items are stored. This is what we call the fixed item catalog, property catalog, where every item with a unique identifier is stored here. You can attach written specifications to those items, or you can attach PDF documents to the catalog section table. So if you have OPS standards, this is where you'd want to load them and attach some of those OPS documents. So we'll look at that quickly during the demo. The Pay Item Manager is where you get to say, okay, well, this is a site plan, so we're going to label or export the tender with strictly the length of pipe and the material and the diameter, but we don't care about manhole from, manhole to, or depth. So this is where you get to specifically specify how the data entry is set up. Part of that means that you can also specify how it's estimated, and this is where this is managed. So when you combine the standard item catalog with the pay item table, this is the tender section manager. So this is where you get to connect the two, and this ultimately produces the bid document or schedule unit prices, as well as the documents that get attached, the specifications that get attached. So the tender section manager is where it all gets configured and exported ultimately to Excel, etc. So it's a little bit of a tough concept, but essentially it's a relational database that allows for a ton of flexibility. The tender system configuration is our first stop. We'll take you through a little bit of PowerPoint, and then we're going to do a live demo of something simple. I've picked the fencing as a pretty typical item in a project, and it really looks at all of the aspects of both the catalog and the pay item system. So in other words, we'll look at the major systems required: master catalog, the pay item table, and the tender template. So these three items make up the core of the product back end, or under the hood, as they say. The minor systems are optional. In other words, you don't need to have all your standards figured out before you do this. As far as documentations and specs, you don't have to have a cost estimate query even hooked up to this before you start. Data import templates and lookup lists, custom details, and bidder lists, these are all optional back-end systems that you'll work away at connecting ultimately to the tender template. So the first step is when you go to the account, you can get into all of the configuration settings for the entire system. So it's not just the tendering stuff. You can actually specify all of the project-related items as well, like project groups, teams, custom properties for your projects. The lookup list is a huge one that you're going to have to go to often. General settings, the inspection form configurator, and email groups. This is all stuff that is part of the overall system. So you have to be an administrator to get the configuration tab. If you're not an administrator, you won't see those tabs. The specific to the tender configuration or bid configuration, if you're from the US, I notice we have some people from Minnesota joining us today. So let's pretend we're going to use the word bid instead of tender. This is where this is all set up. And so if we go to our next slide here, okay, the standards catalog is our very first step. Then we'll look at pay item manager, and then the tender section manager. So those are the three big ones. Those are the major systems required. The lookup list is a critical part of this because the less typing, the better. The more lookup lists you have, the better, more efficient the data entry becomes. The standards catalog configuration. Now I've broken this up into simple and enhanced because I didn't know really how else to say it. The simple means this could be something as simple as an item code and a description. In other words, there are no real properties, search properties for a site preparation item or bonding or insurance. This is strictly a unique identifier with the item code and the description. Okay, so when you select the Standards Catalog Manager, under the Configuration tab, you have the ability to add whatever fixed properties you want through this grid. And we're going to do that with a fencing example in a second, live. So once you set up the configuration, you can then add items. And this is where you can specifically add all of your detailed data entry items here in the catalog. Okay, so it's important that if you're using item codes, you should basically have them unique. So if you ever have to do a cost estimate query, they will be absolutely unique for estimating. Okay, so let's go ahead and set up a fencing example, and we're going to keep it fairly simple here. Let me just grab my web page. If you have any questions, like I said, you can ask through the chat window, and we'll address them as they come up. So here's the main web page, builterra.com. And just a second here. Okay, if we go ahead and log in, you put in your unique email and password. So this is the dashboard here that you can access the account. So we can go to account. Again, you have to be a administrator for this. If you go to configuration, you can get to all of the tender configuration items here. If you are a tender manager, you can get to the configuration items through the configuration menu here. So this means that you're not quite an administrator, but you are a tender manager, and you can, in fact, edit these items through this interface. So if we go to the standard catalog, okay, we can create a new catalog, or we can just add to one that you've already started. So I've already started a getting started. If you had to add a brand new one, say it's say for site plans or something, you would just type in site plans. Okay, and you would add a new catalog. So this is a brand new, standard, and then you could section it off. You could say this is, section 1 or something like this, or division 1, and you'd add a new group, just like that. So it's very similar to just adding folders, and then you would add a section table for that, and you call it, 100-1-1. Sorry. These are just random numbers, by the way. So we can add the 100, okay, And then this is where we get this interface here, where we can then go ahead and configure it. So as soon as you create a new table, it always starts off with item code and description. That's the bare minimum. So I always like to put in a note, and this is, again, this right away, this expands it from an existing system where the note itself is an extra field, and you can define it any which way you want. And this is the best part about it. You can call it a note, okay, and you immediately have an extra field here. So if we were to call this fence type, so let's call this fencing, okay. So we'll save that. So now we're thinking, okay, this isn't just an item, description of bonding or insurance, is actually fencing. So the first thing we need to know is, okay, let's add some fencing types. So if we said add an item, this would be again, a simple configuration. So 100, you can type in whatever you want here, .1, F1 or something. You could do that even, F1 for fun. Okay, and you could say this is a chain link fence. Sorry about the cap lock there. And you could put in a note, as per OPESS or something. So you can split this up. The note can be a separate note just like that. And then ultimately we can push it together and make a single description. So that's your very first entry. So when you actually add the standard items, it's quite easy to then say duplicate and start adding more items. Okay, so I'm just going to add a couple, and then we'll expand this into a lookup list system. So again, we'll just do that. We'll say it's post and wire. There it is. We'll save that. Okay, so now we've got two default entries. So in your own system, you would, of course, build up all of these tables. If we take a look at some of these site preparation items, dust suppression, you've got road sweeper with a note, road flusher with a note. So very nice. So survey. So this is literally whatever you want it to be. Okay. Pre and post construction survey. So I keep these descriptions fairly small, because when you drag and drop it into the ultimate bid, all you're seeing is the item code and description. All the notes and any other fields you add, they automatically move into the tender with a matching pay item code. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back to our fencing example. And we're going to hook up a lookup list to this now. All right, so if we click on this button here, we can go to the lookup list system. It's like a shortcut link back into the configuration. So if we go to tender, we've already got a fence type lookup list, which probably came from some other catalog that we imported. So if we take a look at the fence types, we've already got a list already here. So we've got post and wire, chain link, temporary steel, wall rail. So all we can do is, if we wanted to, we could add another one, call it, say this is a ESC sediment fence or something. I don't know. All right. Notice I left out the word fence. It's inferred that it is, in fact, a fence. Okay. So all of the lookup lists for the tendering system are under the lookup list system. So all of your pipe class, your road materials, these are all prefab lists that allow themselves to be added to your actual catalog or pay item. So if we go to this chain link fence and post and wire fence, you can in fact go back to configuration, and you can add a new field called fence type. So let's go ahead and say 4, and we'll say fence type, just like that. And now, when you click over here, you can pick a lookup list called fence types, okay, and save it. Okay, so notice I haven't got things like length or lump sum or any of that in this catalog. In other words, the catalog can be shared to multiple pay item types. So a fence type or a fence item can be a lump sum, it can be a length, it could be, you know, whatever you need it to be, right? Yeah, as long as there's a separate pay item for it. So we'll get into that in a second. So the fence type is now a lookup list. If we go back to items, there's the fence type. When you double click, you can pick what it is. So it's a chain link fence. Very handy for searches now. So now when you search for a fence, you don't have to know this code, right? You don't have to know that code. All you have to know that it's a chain link fence. Okay, so this is a post and wire, et cetera, et cetera. So just like that, we've built an enhanced catalog just by adding a couple of new fields here. Okay, and just checking the time, 1:24. So we've got lots of time left here. So if we go ahead and we want to add a document, maybe the OPSS, you know, is per municipal standard or something. So if you go to documents, there's nothing attached here. So you have to go to our next, you know, minor system called the Documents Manager. So the Documents Manager is, you know, just like another system that has multiple documents attached to it. And these are all city standards or state standards, provincial standards. You have to upload them yourselves. We don't do that for you. So you can say, this is the OPS 500 or something. I forget the name of it. We can revise it after. So add a document. So when you add the document, it goes ahead and basically it pulls out this thing where you get to now attach a specific document to this this entry here. So when I say this is the OPSS, 500 for fence, okay, there it is. So basically I can now browse for the document and be on my desktop. So you might want to pre-populate all the OPSD. So it's not a 500, it's a 540. So if I said okay, so it uploads that document, and we'll change this to a 540 just to be consistent and save it off. So now we've got an attached document to our complete portal. We don't have to, one set will suit all different types of catalogs and profiles now. So if we go back to the Standards Manager, and we'll just reselect this so it knows that we've got an update to our document. So now if I pick fencing, documents, and I said it was getting started. So now we've got the OPS 540 in our system, and we can now just attach it to this particular section table. So the fencing covers various types of fencing as per the OPSS standard. So, and then every time you use this site plans catalog, it will appear in the documents system as part of the bid. Okay. All right. So I think you're getting that bit now. So if we just go back to here, so added properties. So the simple form, you understand that. The added properties. So in this sample, it's a circular sewer. We've got things like material, diameter, and class. And as you can see, they've got the lookup lists attached to them. So this is what you want to do. You want to get the lookup lists in there. So if you're an American, if it's diameter, it might be inches, right? So the units actually are however it wants to be labeled. It'll compare like units no matter what. It could be apples and oranges. It doesn't, as long as it's the same in the table, then it will compare equally. So when you go ahead and pre-populate this or populate it, then the user has access to all of these items when they go ahead and build a tender. All right. So we looked at the lookup list system. So you would go ahead and add up as much prefab lookup list items as you can for your items. And then we'll talk about the pay item list. So the next category is our pay item description. So once you've gone ahead and done this, let's just drop the fencing into we can just copy this and then pop it into the roadway here. So now we've made a copy of that item, and we can go ahead and do whatever we need to do as part of the regular catalog. So there it is there. It copies all the items as well as the documents here. Okay, so that's a quick way to make copies of things if you're playing around and making standards and putting it all together as one. So primary roadway, we've just added the fencing. Let's go ahead and just change that so it matches our syntax. So this would be the 400.7 fencing, and we'll just quickly go through and make this look the same as the other ones. So 400.7.1. Be alphanumeric as well. Doesn't have to be, just numbers. Okay, there you go. Okay, so we've just re-indexed those, and let's go ahead and create a pay item table for the same fencing item here. So we've got fence type, good. We return to configuration. So the next step is the pay item manager. So the pay item manager is basically the flexible pay item properties that people would add data to. So we're going to add a fencing one, fencing by length. Fun. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and add this pay item. And the fencing by length is, it starts off with item code, description, and note as a default. And we know that if we look back in our standards, our standard thing here, let's just make sure we have the right spelling because it matters. So if I go to standards catalog, under the getting started roadway, there's a fencing category. Good. Fencing table. So we need to match the spelling of these things. So when you drag and drop, it brings all the properties with it, the values of your default. So fence type, if we go back to pay items, we'll then replicate this. I know it seems like extra work, but ultimately have to do it just so we know what fields to drag and drop in. So you'll say it's a fence type list, just like that. And then the sample will be chain link. So this is just so you can see how it appears in the description, and we'll get to that in a second. So the fence type has been added, okay, and we want to measure this by length. So we have to add a flexible pay item called length right there. So this is where you actually get to type in what's the length of this, and you can specify just a whole number like an integer or a 1 decimal place. You can specify feet or meters or yards, whatever you want it to be. So this would be meters, and it'd be 100.7 meters, just as a sample. And so we've got the fence type, we've got the length. If you wanted to bring in a standard or something like that, you would have to add a standard to here, like as per OPSD, whatever. That's in the note just as well. Okay. So once you've got this set up and you specified length as how we want to pay for this thing, then it will come up here under length. There's other fields here. There's defaults like each, lump sum, allowance. So this is if you just, it's going to be $8,000 for that fence. You just say it's an allowance and it's done. Lump sum, it's always just 1 unit and you just pay one price. Okay, so if it was things like each, then you'd put in how many fences, right? So length is our user-defined quantity field, and that has to be specified here. So then what happens is you can write in, well, how does it appear in the bid? So the bid, you would say, well, we want to add the description called, you know, chain link fence, but instead of having the description show it, we could say fence type and replace that field, and then type in between the square brackets fence, just like this, chain link fence, just like that. Okay, and it's defined by length. So let's go ahead and save this fence by length and get back to our PowerPoint just to stay on track. If you have any questions, please look it up in the chat window. Oh, sorry. Okay. So there's our pay item configuration simple. So item code description and note. Okay, that would be the very basic thing. Okay. Manual. This means that manual means if you drag and drop an item and it's you know, it could be lump sum, it could be meters, could be meters squared, different quantity types. You want to specify that on the fly in the contract. You don't want to be tied down by any specific quantity field. So this is kind of for items in your catalog that, say, a temporary pond where you're going to have pipes, you're going to have earthworks, you're going to have all these different items all combined into one big price. So this is where you would specify it as a manual pay item, and then during the project you would specify what types of units they are and the quantities. Okay, so the description, this is what comes out in the actual bid. So the description and note in square brackets, that's all it shows, and then you'll specify the type of pay item. When you look at something more complex like a pipe object, you'll get the start manhole, the end manhole, all of the fixed properties here like material length and class. You'll also get length, the street name, the average depth, the soil type. So this is a very complex pay item. And then the long description is completely built from properties. So this is great for private projects where you're extracting from a pipe network in Civil 3D, and you want to just populate all this data in a few minutes using the Design Connect tool that we have for Civil 3D, and then it'll fill in all this information and put it in your tender just like the preview. So manhole from, manhole to, the diameter, material and class as per the depth. Okay. And of course, the quantity field is the length of the pipe. So that's why it's so flexible. You can have any item you want with any property, and it can handle it. Okay, there's that. So let's go head back to our piping example, or sorry, our fencing example. So the fence type here, what if we want to price this based on not just the fence type, but the height of the fence? So we might want to add that as well as a numeric field. Say it's the height, and that's a number. Say it's this. The units is, you know, vertical meters or something. You can do that, and you can say it's 1.2, right? So when I say save, I've added now a new variable called height, and this helps us out with our cost estimating. So we can say install, you just say height, right? There it is, install 1.2 vertical meter, you know, chain link fence, you know, based on as per whatever the standard is. So you can just save that. If you don't like the use of vertical meters, you can just double click this at any time and take out that and set it back here. And of course, the preview has now changed. So this is how it will come out in the tender. If you want to put street name, then you could say, you know, on street you know, like this, and you can add a street name variable. So you can do pretty much anything you want in that descriptive area. We'll just keep it simple with this 1.2 meter fence by length. So now that you understand this part, let's go to the next slide. So the cost estimate query is built on all of the properties that you're using in the pay item, and then you can have it query based on that. So if we go back to our example, let's go to fencing by length. If I'm going too fast, you can tell me to slow down, but we only have another 15 minutes or so. So the fencing by length, you could say fencing costs, just like that, and then you can add $1 here. So all this means is now when you go to fencing costs, you can add both pay item query builder and project query builder. So this is project related item query, and this is the actual object here, the item. So if I said, okay, we're going to add the fence type. So only compare the fence type. Only compare the item code. So if you just lean on the item code, you can do all your estimating. That's a lot of these city systems do that. If you're in land development, you might want to say, well, I want to compare the chain link or post and wire fence against every other post and wire fence. So you could save that. You can also say, well, since height is a parameter, we can add the height right there. And exact match or plus or minus. So if it's plus or, you can say basically it's a 1.2 meter high, save it. So now you've got a query that says, give me only compare other fence types at the same height, right? If it's a project related property, you can add, say, for example, compare only the same project types. Maybe it's a land development, so only compare against other land development projects, something like this. Okay? If it's, only compare things in one part of the city or the other, you can do what you call proximity. So only compare it to other projects that are close, less than or equal to 100 kilometers from this project. So this is where you put in the proximity variable as well. So we'll just take this out for now, just so we don't limit our query. And we're going to go ahead and save that. Okay, save it. So this is the cost estimate query. This is where it's all done, right in the pay item. Now all we have to do is connect it up in our template. So if we go back to our PowerPoint, we're looking at the various enhanced query with projects. Good. The tender section manager is where we get to join the two together. This is what we want to do. We want to create a common template for every project type and combine these catalogs and pay item types. So our third step, our third system here is to go to the tender section manager, and we're going to put a fencing type. So this is where you can have, say, an earthworks contract. You can have a getting started. You can have a municipal site plan. You can have any type of template you want. This really represents the spreadsheet. So when you go to getting started, it tells you how to enumerate things. If you wanted to the type of package, what type of drawings you want to add to the zip file that gets sent to bidders. So this is where this all happens. If we go to the primary roadworks, we don't have a fencing type here, so we could type in, fencing, just like that, and then go ahead and add the section table. So fencing has been added, and we can move it up in the list. So see how the enumeration is all happening as if you kept moving it up, the enumeration is changing. If you want to really go fast, you can turn off the auto enumerate and go, 1, 2, 3, and then turn it back on, and it comes up in the third position. So this is kind of a quick way to move stuff down in the list or up in the list without having it constantly regenerate. So when I pick fencing, this is blank. So now you can say, okay, well, we added a fencing to our catalog. Let's go to the getting started. And this was a primary roadway item, and it's now under fencing right there. Now, next step is to connect this catalog item with this pay item type. So the pay item could be, for example, fencing by length, which is great. Once you select this, you can then tell it how to do the cost estimate right there. So now we've got all three set up, and then you just pick what you want the user to type in. If it's bolded, it means it's common between the catalog and the pay item. In other words, when you drag and drop, it will match. If fence type was not bold, and if it was just like length or height, then if you tried to drag and drop, it wouldn't include the type of fence, and that would be, you don't want that. So once you go ahead and save, the initial setup is already done. And then what you want to do is set the grouping and sorting of that item. So then you can say, well, I want to sort all my data entry by fence type right there. And I want to sort it by maybe the height of the fence. So this is where this is all happening here. Okay. And you can save that. Then there's other settings for, you know, whether you want it in the Excel spreadsheet as a new worksheet. You don't want to show it in the summaries. So there's all these little details, and you have to do training for that to maybe understand a bit more. You can add specifications to this pay item, the section table if you want. In other words, you can add the specs anywhere along the line. You don't have to add it to the catalog. You can just do it here. The notes, you could say, you know, install fencing as per specifications listed for each item. So this will actually come out in the tender as a description for the fencing type. So you wouldn't put this. So part of, I noticed that some of our customers are putting it like up here, and then, you know, they're putting a big long description up here, but you don't want to do that. You want to keep it very simple, call it fencing, and then you put it in here like this. Okay. And then once you save it, it's now part of the template. And the next step is to actually create a tender from this. So if we keep on to our PowerPoint, we'll just check the time here. We've got about 5 more minutes. Sorry for the bit of a training session. So these are all the setups that we talked about that would happen in the template level. Then basically you can go ahead and configure the table tender table section table, sorry. Okay, there we go. The enhanced one, you'll pick all of the items that you want somebody in grouping and sorting, which is nice. Okay. Specifically, you can pick one or more, one cost estimate query. You can have different ones if you want to, you know, query it based on depth or not. When you go ahead and create the tender, this is where you get to say whether it's historical or active. And let's go ahead and do that right now before we run out of time. So if I go to tenders, new tender. So now when you select the project, say it's the project Y32 section, demo account, this is where you say, okay, it's a historical tender. We're going to add old prices. So this is the 2016 prices. Okay. And say it's road and sewer, just for fun. Okay, create master will copy every single item into it. We don't want to do that. We do want to pick some dates in the past because it'll see this as a tender that was made in 2016. And then we can pick getting started. So once you go ahead and create that, it's now got the fencing type in it. So we're going to review that right away before we run out of time. So if we look under the major test projects, under the Y21 section here, there is the 2016 prices. That's a historical tender. I can tell by the color of the box. If you want a reminder, here it is, historical. Okay. So there's nothing in it. When we go ahead and pick the edit sections, let's go right down to the roadworks. There's the fencing right there. That's what we just added in the G6 section. Okay, and there's our defaults that we had in our catalog. So right away, you can see what the relationships are. You can see all of that happening in the final tender. Of course, if you're just a tender user, this is all you'll ever see. If you're the tender manager, then you know how it's all put together. So if I go ahead and drag and drop this over, then we can say, well, see how the chain link automatically came in, post and wire automatically came in. We just have to specify the height. So this is a 1.5, okay, and this is a 1.8, something like this. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, that's length. So say it's 142, and this is a 1.5, and the length, the quantity field shows up in blue. That's how I should have recognized that. 196, and it's a 1.8 meter high fence. Okay, so right away it's coming up with this stuff. And we'll do a quick time check. 12:49. Okay, if you had previous data in here for this, you could click cost estimate, and it would actually give you the price of previous projects. There's nothing in there for that because it's brand new. If you go to pricing, this is where you get to add a bidder. So you can just add a bidder and say this was ABC fencing, and they did the whole job, even though it was just fencing. You could add, say it's on-cast construction or something like this. Okay, so maybe they don't bid on it, maybe they do. So basically, ABC fencing was going to charge you $65 per meter for the chain link, and maybe $85 for this stuff, and it already extends the price. This guy has a cheaper bid at $45. He's very efficient, and this guy is more like $79. So he's a better price, as you can see. So now we've got two separate prices, right? And the more items you add, so you could say, well, we're going to duplicate this and just change the change the size of the fence, 1.2, and then the pricing is a little smaller. So we're going to say it's 55 and say 44. Okay, so now we've got lots of pricing added. So the next time we go ahead and make a new tender, we've actually got pricing for this item. So if we slip back there real quick, we've got our 2016 prices already added. Okay, so that's important. If you were to set up a brand new job, say it's this Fibonacci job, you can create a new tender from here, or you can pick it from the list. Okay, so now if we pick a new project and say it's the CAD Manager, it's an active tender, say it's 2018, okay, it's a fencing job. All right, so if you go ahead and create a brand new bid, that means as you add the fencing, as you add pipes and curbing, whatever sections data you want, it will magically appear with the pricing. So we did all that in the last 45 minutes. So there's the fencing item there. Okay, so we can grab this and drag it in just like that, put in our new length for our new project. So there's lots of fencing there. So this is a big highway job or something. Okay, and we'll put in some heights. Might be good to put this on a lookup list, by the way, just in case, because then you won't have a user entry problem. So when you go to cost estimate, it's already calculated it. You've already got the pricing. When you click details, there's the job that we just typed in. Remember this one here? So basically, if you can grasp these concepts around building the tender templates, catalogs, and pay items, performing a historic cost estimate entry, then all of your jobs, you can do the estimating super quick. When you download the spreadsheet, this is what goes to the bidder. And just like that, we're going to see a fencing addition to our roadworks option here. And it is right there. So then the bidder can add in his unit price. And we'll just enable that. say it's 55 and 66. Just like that, you're going to be able to skim those prices from your new for your new projects into the system. Okay. So let's just check in. I think we're done here. So historic tender, yes, we understand that. We're dragging and dropping, doing a quick cost estimate, looking at some pricing. Very good. Okay. As far as comparing, you can then compare bids. We didn't show you that because we're out of time. Okay. And you can drill right down to the individual items. You can download all your cost estimates to a spreadsheet. And essentially, this is the back end in the last 50 minutes. I hope that you got something out of today's webcast. I'm going to open up the floor, unlock the unmute, and if you have any, and there it is right there. Does anybody have any questions before we end the webcast for today? If you don't, you can email me, you can text me through the chat window, and hopefully this was a good webcast for you to actually move forward and start, implementing your own standards at your company.
As we inspect the project.
Okay, there we go. Questions? Yes, thank you. And by the way, if you do get us to do training, it's a lot slower. In other words, Chris Stebbing, my partner, will come in and actually walk you through the entire process. I do have a bad habit of going quick. So one of the questions here, can you customize the output entering your own logo? Yes. Basically on the website, that was one of the questions. If you go to the account here, there is a account page here, profile. So you can change the logo right there. And so if we go to the downloads here, see how this civil comes up here? So you can, it's just a logo here. All of this is custom to or configurable through the template. Okay. This stuff is the summary table. It's not really configurable. All of these tabs are all configurable through the system. So when you look at, for example, the configuration of the tender section getting started, see how each one of these has a start a new worksheet. If I was to turn that all off, then all of the items would be in their one big tab. So I could literally turn all of that off here in the template. Okay, hope that answers your question. Okay. If you have more questions, you can email me anytime. We are focused on your support, so please don't suffer in pain, or don't suffer in silence, we'll say. We are here to help you. And with that, I'll wish you guys a great weekend, and we'll talk to you in a couple weeks. Thank you.